Hey everyone, Michael here. In today's video, we're going to check out another new audio plugin designed for immersive and spatial audio production. This time it's a panning plugin by a relatively new developer. The plugin is called Move It by Hull. The developer positions the plugin as an ultimate surround sound tool. This is a very interesting one, and I do have a few thoughts about it. So let's jump in. Before I get started, a quick disclaimer. Hull provided me with a free license of Move It, but they did not ask me to make a video and have no input in what I'm going to say. In fact, they don't even know that I'm making this video. And a quick reminder, if you want to stay informed about everything spatial audio or just want to chat with like-minded people, I invite you to join our free Discord server. An invite link is in the description below. And with that being said, let's open up today's session and see what Move It is all about. For today's video, I'm going to piggyback on a session that I used in my last video where I looked at the new features of Virtuoso, which is a binaural renderer. If you have not seen this video, I recommend that you watch it. I'm going to leave a link in the description. It's a Studio One session, very simple one. I'm still working with version 6 of Studio One because I'm recording this the day before version 7 comes out. And let's just have a listen what we have. And this is really a track that I use multiple times in my videos simply because it doesn't give me any grief when it comes to copyright. I'm working on a Mac. Almost everything that I'm going to show you today works in Windows in exactly the same way. So let's add our Move It panning plugin. And the way I'm going to do that is a little unconventional. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that after the Dolby Atmos renderer. And I know this is not the way you're supposed to do that. And I already see people in the comment section hammering away that I'm doing something completely wrong. This is just for demonstration purposes. So what I really want to do is I want to just show how this plugin works. And the best way to really do that is to just kind of put it on the master bus really after the Dolby Atmos renderer, even though for regular production purposes you would never do that because it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to put that right before Virtuoso in the section or in this insert, or I kind of make it an insert after the Dolby Atmos renderer. So let's just add that here. So let's search for Move It, and here we are. And then I'm going to just move it in front of Virtuoso because I first want to pan and then I want to render into binaural. Now this is the interface of Move It. It is actually relatively easy to understand. It really kind of makes clear that the developer wanted to make this as accessible as possible. However, in doing so, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later, there is a bit of an issue because you need to use certain shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, in order to access most of the functionality of the panning window. So this will become a little bit of an issue. But otherwise, this is actually kind of very well designed. There are first of all, there are three different windows that we have. We have the panning window here. We have a mixing window. So this also serves as a mixer. Now, unfortunately, I can resize that, but to different sizes, but I cannot change the aspect ratio. And the consequence of that is that in the mixing window, if you have more than 8 channels, I believe, then you always need to scroll. That's one of the things that I do not like. And it's kind of, quite frankly, many of the things that I have a grievance with this plugin are really minor user interface tweaks that I would think that they can sort out relatively quickly. But this is one of the things that's a little bit annoying. So regardless of what you do, regardless of what size you choose, you always have to scroll here. And then we have a routing window. And the routing window is actually a nice feature, something that I actually had searched for quite a while. There weren't really a lot of options out there that allowed you to reroute channels in a multi-channel track. There are now a couple of alternatives on the market. It's nice to have, and the thing that I really like is that they integrated these 3 different tools into one plugin, which is actually quite usable. Now, this is fairly self-explanatory, so you have incoming tracks and you have outgoing tracks, and you can simply route whatever track is coming into whatever track you want to kind of have it going out, and that can be really, really useful. So let's go back to the panning window. Now, you only have a top-down view, and that's also one of the problems that I have. It's a little bit difficult to really see the height information of the individual sources. So if I take a source, for example, and I move that around, I'm currently moving that horizontally, so there is no height information. In order to get the height information, I actually need to press a modifier key, and let me just kind of see which one it is, because I constantly forget which one it is. Here we are. Okay, here we are. So it is the control key, and that already is also a bit of a problem. You need to know exactly what modifier key you have to, you need to kind of press. Now, fortunately, there's an info button here. And when you click on that info button, it will actually tell you what modifiers you need to use. So the elevation is the control key. Now I'm working with a Windows keyboard here. That's why I had a bit of an issue finding which key is what. But essentially, you need to kind of, you can always go to that info screen and it will tell you what shortcuts you need to use. Now, one of the issues that I have is that for some of the movements, you actually need to press 4 modifiers simultaneously, and that can be really tedious. I'm honestly not going to try this here on my Windows keyboard, because I'm probably going to press the wrong buttons. But even if you have a Mac keyboard, it takes quite a bit of getting used to be perfectly honest. And on Windows, these shortcuts, by the way, are different. So if you are using that plugin in Windows, the shortcuts look different. And in the manual, it was also not completely clear to me if in the Windows version all of those options are actually available to you. So it might be that in Windows there are certain movements that you can't do. But anyway, this is where we are. So essentially, if I click on if I click on the Alt key, essentially it sets it back. Now, if I do a right click, I select all channels simultaneously, and then I can essentially move them around like that, and I can reset them once again by clicking the modifier key. If I hover over a certain source, I have all the information that I need available to me. So there's the X, Y, Z coordinates, there is the volume. I can change the volume, and I also can do that in the mixer. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I have the spread, which is sort of almost like a object size. So you can decide to spread that out a little. And you have the amount of information that you want to send into the LFE here as well. There are 2 different panning modes. There is the classic panning mode, which follows the 3 dB rule. And then there is a distance panning mode, which is what I understand a modified distance-based amplitude panning kind of thing. You might want to try which one works better for you, but the classic one is the default one. Then you have sort of this help. So in case you're getting lost in that plugin, you kind of have these little helps popping up, and you can disable that. And then there's an interesting feature that I'm honestly not completely sure why it is there, but kind of there might be people who actually need that. You can upload an image, probably in order to kind of visualize the room that you're in. Kind of if that's something that is helpful to you. The thing which makes this really interesting is that you have the same thing also for the speakers. So you can move the speakers around, or you can move the sources around. And you can do that in a very flexible way. So let me try one thing. Let's see. What happens if I do that? Okay, yeah. So there are a couple of very innovative ways. So I'm pressing 3 modifiers keys simultaneously. I'm not quite sure which keys these are on a Mac keyboard. Once again, I'm sitting on a Windows keyboard here, but that's perfectly fine. And once again, if I click on one with the Alt modifier key, it sets it back. And obviously, I can do the same thing here for the speakers as well. So if I select all speakers, I can do the same thing here and kind of move that around, or kind of in any way, shape, or form I want, and I can reset that. So that is actually a really nice way of doing things. I just would have hoped to have a little bit more information about the height, because in the current layout, the way this looks, it's very difficult to see where that object or where that source actually is. So if I go back to the sources here, and if I move that, and let's see, yeah, that's the one. So kind of, it does give me the information essentially what height it has, but it's really not that intuitive. So kind of having a second window would have really helped. It doesn't need to be three-dimensional, just kind of a second view would have helped, quite frankly. So let's set that back to where it was. Now, so much to the panner. Obviously, you also have an LFE here, so that's fine as well. So let's move over to the mixer. Now, in the mixer, you can kind of change the gain of the individual sources. You also have the option here to change the spread and the amount of information that goes into the LFE. You can do that for the sources, but you can also do that for the speakers. So let's just play the audio maybe. And as you can see, it's getting already a little bit tricky because I don't see all the faders simultaneously. Now what I can do is I can expand here, and then at least see sort of the gains of the individual kind of tracks coming in. And then obviously I can kind of solo certain tracks or sources. I can do that on the source side, or I can also do that on the speaker end of things, which is actually really interesting. So I haven't seen that implemented in that way yet. Now, on the speaker side of let me stop the audio again. On the speaker side of this mixer, there is one feature that I find is particularly interesting, and that is this re-injection here. And what that does is it treats the source almost like an object in Dolby Atmos, and kind of reroutes some of the information that goes into that source channel through the neighboring channels. So it's you could think of it as almost like kind of using that individual channel as a source object that is then sort of played in that room and kind of distributed accordingly to the appropriate speaker. So what do I mean by that? So let me just kind of maybe solo the kick. I think that's the kick. So let's just kind of see what we have here. Yeah. So if I re-inject part of that left channel here, for example, what will happen is some information is going to come in on the neighboring channels, which is the center channel and then the left surround. And I can obviously also do the same thing on the right one as well. And then essentially I have information coming in on the left, right, and on the center channel, and then on the left and the right surround channel. So that way you can kind of rebalance the channels in your image, and that's actually a really nice feature. Now, since we're already on here, I can also select to add a high-pass filter, so I can kind of add a high-pass filter here. So let's just maybe do that here on the left and right channel, and then I can reroute whatever I've cut out to the LFE. So this obviously is the kick, so I don't really want to kind of high pass that completely. So what I can then do is simply kind of reroute that to the LFE, and that will then here come in as at the LFE. Now this is probably too much now, so I have to probably kind of reduce that a little. And once again here on the right side, I see how everything is going. So this is actually really, really nice. Now, a couple of additional things. You can mute or kind of disable certain tracks by clicking on that button here. You can change the name by double-clicking here, and then I can essentially change anything. It just is limited to 3 letters, so you can't change it to anything other than 3 letters. And that's pretty much it. You have the same thing here on the sources as well. So I can change the name and I can disable the source. So that's actually kind of everything there is. And everything else is fairly self-explanatory. So once again, very nice feature, something that I think can be really useful depending on your particular workflow. Now, there's one major issue that I have, and that in order to see that, let's go over to the panning window. You might have noticed that there is no option here to change the channel layout. Now, one of the ideas is that you can do everything manually, obviously, so you can rename all the individual channels and then essentially move them to whatever position you have. So the idea is that you can do that manually. However, it would have been really useful to force the plugin into certain channel configurations, and why I think this would have been really useful becomes really visible if you use the very same plugin in Reaper. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to Reaper and just load in the plugin to kind of show you exactly what I mean and where I think the major problem of this plugin really is. So here I have an empty session of Reaper. Let me just add one new track. And what I'm going to do is first I'm going to turn that into a 12-channel track. So let's just kind of do that. And then let's just add an instance of MoveIt. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to show you essentially what I mean by the problems that I'm having. And as you can see, the plugin loads up fine. However, it loads up as a 5.1.4 plugin. And let's say we are on a 12-channel track. So let's say this is 7.1.4. So the question is, where are the remaining two channels? And the answer is they are kind of hidden here. So if I move that out of the way, I essentially see the remaining ones. And the reason for that is because it defaults to a certain channel configuration and you can't really force it into any other channel configuration. So what you have to do now is you would have to manually kind of move this to the places that you need in order to make everything work. Well, actually, that's wrong. So I would have to move it here. Oops, move it here. And you have to do that every single time you load that plugin, which can be really annoying. And you not only have to do that for the incoming channels, you also have to do that for the speakers, obviously, because the speakers are also in 5.1.4. So I need to do the same thing here as well. And this can become really, really annoying, especially since it might actually happen that you have to search for those. So let me just kind of do one thing. And let me just kind of change that to a 12-channel track, so a 16-channel track. Okay, so let's now we have a 16-channel track. So let's see what we have here. And you might wonder, that looks kind of okay, but it really doesn't, because I only have 14, right? So this is a 7.1.6 layout. So the question now is, where are the remaining two channels? And I actually had to search for it a little. One of them is hidden here, and the other one is where was it? Here, okay. And that really is super annoying. So I wish they would have implemented some way to force the plugin into certain channel configurations, because the way it is right now, as nice as this plugin is, it becomes completely unusable if you're working with something like Reaper, for example. It's just kind of hunting the channels constantly, and then having to do the same thing whenever you add the plugin to the track is really super annoying. But otherwise, I think this is actually a really nice one. Now, this should be very easy to fix. I hope the developer sees that and kind of recognizes that this is an issue. I hope this will be added in a future update, because that would really make this a super nice plugin. Now, I need to point out that if you're working with Nuendo, Pro Tools, Cubase, Studio One, or any other digital audio workstation that has very well-defined multi-channel configurations on their multi-channel tracks, this is not an issue, right? This is only an issue in something like Reaper, but it is a big issue. So I hope they fix this. So that was MoveIt by HAL. Now I have to be perfectly honest, when I first saw the price tag of 189 euros, I was taken aback a bit. It is a nice penna, but not at that price tag. However, at closer inspection, the plugin is more than just a penna. The developer advertises it as an ultimate surround sound tool. I'm honestly not sure if I would agree to that, but it does indeed integrate a few very useful features that I actually need quite often, and it does that in a very nice consolidated package. So I do think that there is a market of people who probably don't mind paying the approximately $200 if it solves a problem they are having or if it simplifies their workflow. Nevertheless, I would not necessarily recommend this to the average hobbyist. If this plugin looks appealing to you, make sure that you try it out before you make the purchase. In terms of functionality, it does what it advertises, and it does it quite well, actually. There are a few minor gripes that I have that are largely related to the usability of the plugin. First, the panning interface only shows a top-down view, which is not ideal if you're working in a format that takes advantage of height information. Some alternative view would be nice, and the window resize option is a bit limiting. For example, higher channel counts you can't get on one interface window. You have to actually kind of scroll to the side, which is a bit annoying. I also had my issues with the keyboard shortcuts. They are a lot less intuitive than one would like. For some speaker movements, you have to press 4 modifier keys simultaneously. It is workable, but I would have preferred something slightly more usable. Finally, and most importantly, I would really have preferred to see some options that allow you to force the plugin into certain channel configurations. Yes, you can adjust everything manually, but that can become very tedious. This is particularly a problem if you're working in a DAW that does not have defined channel configurations for its tracks, such as Reaper, for example. If you use it in Reaper, you have to adjust everything manually every single time you load the plugin onto a track. And for that reason, I can't really recommend this plugin if you're working with Reaper. If you're working with something like Pro Tools, Cubase, Nuendo, Studio One, or any other digital audio workstation that uses defined channel layouts on multi-channel tracks, it might be worth a look. But I would really be interested in your opinions about this plugin. Do you think this is something you would use? Do you mind the relatively high price? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about that. But that's everything I wanted to say today. If you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to press the like button and subscribe to this channel. And with that being said, I'll see you all in the next video.